Criteria for evaluating fiction will be discussed in class. To those who would raise the bugbear of subjectivity or instructor favoritism, please see the classroom motto, "Life is not fair." Though the instructor promises to do her best to evaluate student work according to clearly defined standards and procedures, students should note that this represents a break from the way in which business is conducted on campus. See, for example, my recent performance review, a vengeful hack job written by a member of the faculty not to be identified here, but recognizable by her badly dyed bouffant and her marriage to the scholar come novelist referenced above.
Thanks for listening to Read Minnesota Books. I'm your host, Deborah Copperud. Here are some facts about me and today's guest, Julie Schumacher. Professor Schumacher was my senior honors thesis advisor at the University of Minnesota. We were both on a Mississippi River dinner cruise with a class of aspiring comedy writers with Garrison Keillor. That was weird. The morning of September 11th, 2001, I had an office hours appointment with Professor Schumacher. Classes were canceled, which I found out after I got to campus. I went to the appointment anyway because I was 22. I didn't know anything. And she wisely told me to go home, where I watched TV news for about 12 hours straight. And the world was changed forever. Julie Schumacher is the author of 11 books, including the national bestseller Dear Committee Members, which won the Thurber Prize for American Humor. That's a big deal. Schumacher's other works include The Shakespeare Requirement, The English Experience, 2 short story collections, and 5 novels for young readers. Her new collection, Patient Female, contains stories that previously appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, The American Prospect, and other publications. She is a Regents Professor at the University of Minnesota, where she has received multiple teaching awards. Previous Read Minnesota Books podcast guest Andrew Elfenbein named Julie Schumacher as his favorite Minnesota author. Professor Schumacher, welcome to Read Minnesota Books.
Thank you so much. 25 years ago, you were in my class. That's amazing. 25 years.
Can I call you Julie?
Please.
What is your connection to Minnesota?
I have lived here since 1988 when my spouse got a job in the Twin Cities. We are both East Coasters by birth and had never imagined we would be here so many years later. The plan was to return to the East Coast as quickly as possible, and then we kind of fell in love with the place. So
Nice.
here we are.
Where on the East Coast did you grow up?
I'm from Delaware.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you tell me about Patient Female?
That story has an origin from long ago. One of my first jobs out of college, I had intended to go to New York and become a famous editor, which with a resume that was mostly blank, didn't quite work out. But I did get a job as basically a typist and admin assistant on a journal, a gynecology journal called The Female Patient.
Oh,
And it was my job to type up articles all day long, pre-computer era, of course. And one of the articles was about professional medical patients, including women who trained med students to do gynecological exams. And that idea just always struck me as such a curious thing to do. And but it took me a long time to figure out what kind of story I wanted to make out of it.
in the short story syllabus, you write that the short story can be, quote, a brief immersion in the lives and experiences of others, a vehicle for insight. As a novelist and short story writer, when you start writing a new project, how do you know if it's a short story or a novel?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like a lot of ideas come to me with a vague sense of shape attached to them. I started out as a poet. I'm a lousy poet. I don't write poetry at all anymore because I just can't seem to be able to pull it off. But occasionally an idea will come to me and I think to myself, that's a poem. You know, that idea has the shape of a poem attached to it somehow, but I'm not going to bother with it because I don't write poems. So I feel also that an idea often comes with a sense attached to it of whether it's a novel or a short story. I feel that stories, to me anyway, rely more on situations, and I worry more about plot when it comes to a novel. I don't worry about plot so much when it comes to a short story.
Okay, so you know kind of from the get-go.
Usually, there's again a sense of it. It's not perfectly clear, but there's a general sense.
Well, the title story, thank you for that background. It reminded me a lot of Leslie Jamison's essay collection, The Empathy Exams, because she did do that for real. And the
Hmm.
protagonist in your story plays the patient for medical school students. She is not the only patient female in the book, though. Many of the women characters are doing an unequal share of emotional labor in their relationships. Can you tell me more about how this became a thematic through line in the collection?
Yeah, it became a thematic through line. That's the right way of putting it because I didn't start any of these stories thinking of them as a cohesive collection. They were written over, a period of quite a few years. And I always had in the back of my mind that it would be nice to have a collected, group of them. But I didn't see a sort of through line initially. I think sometimes a through line exists in a writer's work that the writer herself doesn't notice. Other people tend to notice, oh, well, I could tell that was written by so and so because of the tone or the attitude or the bite somehow in a satiric tendency. So it took me quite a while to think, oh, not only are all the protagonists in here female, maybe from ages of 8 to 70 some, but they all do share a kind of sense of prickliness, irritation, restlessness that that helps to define the collection. I hope it helps to define the collection.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks.
Devoured it. Can we do a mini craft lesson?
Okay.
Every Word Matters is a lesson that you taught when I was an undergraduate, and I'm still grappling with this 25 years later, and how to know when I've landed on the right word. So I'd love to get inside your process by isolating one example. In the story Passengers, a little girl harms another child, and her
Mm-hmm.
mother projects her anxieties onto the girl, scrutinizing her mood, behavior, physicality. They go on a spring break trip very guiltily because the injured child is still hospitalized. And on the plane, the daughter fell asleep over New Orleans. That's a quote from the story. And when I read it, I was like, oh, of course, that's the perfect American city to symbolize what's going on in this story.
Huh.
So can you explain how you achieved this? Like, did you look at flight paths? Did you have New Orleans in mind? Did you try out different cities?
I have never been to New Orleans. I'll start with that. And I think typically I start with prose that's not well enough defined. I might have begun that phrase with, she fell asleep on a plane. And then again, you think, oh, how do I keep tuning it and retuning it and fine tuning it so that she didn't just fall asleep. She fell asleep on a plane. She fell asleep on the plane in a seat by the window. She fell asleep by the window in a seat over New Orleans. Just keep making something as tight but as precise as possible because I guess one of the other craft lessons I tried to impart and still try to impart to students is the idea that you can't get to any sense of the universal except through the specific. You
Hmm.
don't, students, beginning students in particular, will say, well, I made it general because I wanted everybody to be able to identify with it. And I say, no, that's not the way you get people to identify with the work. You make it very specific so that a reader can say, oh, I can picture that, or oh, I have an association with New Orleans. That's how you get people to be able to put themselves into a work.
Yeah, that's great. And how do you know when you're done? Because sometimes I feel like I
Mhm.
go beyond the point of making something good and then I'm just messing around.
I know, I know. It's so hard. Honestly, writing is terribly hard. It's it never gets easier, but that's why it's interesting because you
Mhm.
can work and work on something and think, am I done? What does done even mean? Because there is no such thing as perfection. I think when I get to the end of a story, often I realize I've gone on several paragraphs too long. And I think, oh, okay, I just tied up every loose end. I made things tidy. I let my, OCD self out of its box to work on this piece. And sometimes things are better with a few rough edges left visible,
Sure.
a few more question marks left rather than periods at the end of a work.
Well, thank you for indulging my New Orleans example from your collection. What do you like better, writing a first draft or getting into the revising of what you've already written?
Definitely revising, definitely revising. Writing a first draft is harder because there's so many choices. You have so many choices open to you as a writer. You think, well, should I move this whole story to Nebraska? Should I change the point of view? Should I add another character? Should I have these people go on a trip now that I've put them at a bus stop? There's just so many options. That sort of thing feels very daunting to me. Whereas once I've some closed off some doors, closed off some possibilities, and I have a very rough something in front of me. Trying to make that something better feels much easier to me anyway than just starting from scratch, looking at a white page and imagining all the zillion things that could fill it.
Yeah.
I guess I don't like that much freedom. It feels uncomfortable to me.
And who is your favorite Minnesota writer?
Well, I feel like I should say Andy Elfenbein now that he mentioned me. That was very sweet of him. I'm not going to mention one person though. I feel like that's number one, it's politically not a good idea. And number two, there are just too many Minnesota writers. It's a state and a Twin Cities area in particular that is just so full of terrific writers that picking one out of the bunch isn't really possible.
Yeah, it's hard. I might take that question out. It's harder, getting harder to get people to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm just starting. I just bought Python's Kiss, the new Louise Erdrich collection,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I do think she's terrific. I teach her work more than I suppose the work of any other Minnesota writer. I teach the Roundhouse all the time. I teach Shadow Tag all the time. Those books are terrific, as are so many of her other books.
Yeah, those are good recommendations. Are you on social media? Where can folks follow you online?
I'm on email. I'm on email at the University of Minnesota, which is the only email I've ever had. I'm on Facebook, mostly pictures of my dog and a few promotional things for books, but I'm not all that active in social media. I don't do Instagram. I don't do most of the stuff that people your age probably do, or people in their 20s or 30s do. It's just, yeah, I feel like happily a lot of stuff like that has not caught me because if I do turn to Facebook, I can end up watching, sheepdogs herd sheep for an hour. And then I think, well, what am I doing? Why am I spending my time this way? So not terribly active.
Okay, I think it's cooler that way. You're more elusive, mysterious. Well, thank you so much. It was great to speak with you
Yeah,
about your story collection, and I hope that you have a great summer.
yeah, you too. Thanks.
And now for my recommendation. If you are a writer friend of mine, you've heard me gush about Matt Bell's craft book, Refuse to Be Done. The whole thing is really good. You should definitely read it. But if you're in the revision stage, he has a list of weasel words toward the end of the book, mundane words that you can control F in your draft and replace with better words. Page 142 of Refuse to be Done. Use it on whatever you're writing, a story, an essay, an email. And this exercise will instantly improve your writing. Instantly might be a weasel word. Thanks for listening to Read Minnesota Books. Say, I have just 9 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts right now, and I would love 10. Please rate the podcast there, or you can subscribe on Substack. Take care, everyone.